I'm frozen. Hello and welcome to the Flipping and Wholesaling Houses in New York show. I am Michael Pinter, where I teach you how to start flipping or wholesaling houses, or if you are now I'm not great, or if you're already doing it, how to grow your business. So I got a question. I spoke about creative financing on a 2 to 4 family, and I mostly spoken about what goes on in the middle of a wholesale deal that you're in the middle. And I got a question from Juice Rock, which said, so there's no way to exit a contract in New York if a buyer bails out on you during a wholesale deal. So I've spoken about this before. The answer really is it depends, right? In general, I would say 99 out of 100 contracts that I'm in, there's no way out for me. So the question is what happens, right? So let's say you have a deal that you're wholesaling and the buyer bails out on you. So a couple of things. If you're doing your business right, you should take a much bigger deposit from the buyer than you've given. So theoretically, if the buyer was obligated to buy and he wants to bail, you should be able to get his deposit funds. It's not as simple as that. It's happened to me where literally a buyer bailed and their attorney said take the deposit. But usually it's more complicated than that. Your liability as a buyer is really your deposit, right? So if you're able to negotiate a smaller EMD, a smaller earnest money deposit when you're buying something, that is the limit of your liability. So for example, if I have a $5,000 deposit and then a buyer doesn't show up, in theory, if I felt like I do not want to close on it or I don't have the means to close on it, I could say, I'm sorry, I'm out. Let's discuss the funds. Um, but here's what I'll really say. If I have a property that I bought cheap enough that I think I can wholesale it, I'm usually going to be okay closing on it. That's me, right? Now, I know people get into wholesaling because they see gurus who tell them this is a risk-free situation, which it is. In 49 states, you have a contingency in there. During that contingency period, usually called an inspection contingency, or on the West Coast they call it opening escrow, or during that period, either side can walk. In New York, it's usually not. It's not that way. There is no inspection contingency in New York. The inspections get done before contract. So when a buyer agrees to buy a property of mine, we agree on a price. They immediately schedule an inspection, and then if there are any repairs they want done, they're going to put it into the contract. Logically, I think it makes more sense. As a wholesaler, though, it's a little bit of a bitch because I can't get out of the contract. Now, again, so let me reiterate. If I'm buying a property at a low enough price that I feel I can make a wholesale profit, then I can almost always make a profit by closing on it and either wholetailing it, which means I do minimal work to it. I'm doing that right now in an Oceanside property. And I'm doing it in an Island Park property where I'm doing something, or I can rehab it. I guess Island Park is somewhat close to a rehab. But those are my levels, right? So I can hopefully wholesale it, so I have it inexpensive enough that another buyer will take it from me at a spread, right? So I'm in contract at X, they'll buy it plus X plus $30,000, and then they'll do the work to it. I can usually close on it, but again, when I close, I have a lot of expenses. But I can usually close on it and then sell it, in a similar fashion. Do okay. Sometimes I can't. It depends on the condition, obviously. Depends on the area also. Depends on the market for as is properties in that area. Or I can do the work to it and make the money. So I sleep great at night, right? Now, if you're someone who's gotten into wholesaling because they were watching one of the many gurus out there as this is a riskless situation and why can't I just do this, it's more complicated, right? Because if you don't have the ability to close, you are really stuck in the middle. As I said before, you are the middleman. You are representing things to the seller that you really can't do, right? So a buyer says, hey, I'm ready to close next week. You tell the seller, let's close next week. The buyer calls you the day before closing and says, I'm not closing. You're going to have to call the seller and say, I'm not closing. So again, there is somewhat of being in the middle and somewhat representing things that are complicated and that it can get complicated. If you run your business correctly, you're putting down a small deposit with the seller and you've collected a much bigger deposit from the buyer. And there should be no discrepancy between the contracts. Right? I've made this mistake where I've told the seller, this happens unfortunately more than I can count. I've told the seller I'll take it as is. The seller's attorney does a standard contract which says it's going to be broom clean. And then the buyer assigns the contract and says, well, I took over your contract and it says broom clean. And the seller says, you told me I didn't have to do anything. Now, could I be an asshole and say to the seller, F you, you're contractually obligated to clean it? Yes, but I am not an asshole, and I have never done that. So then I have, in maybe a dozen situations, paid for junk removal guys to come in, paid for cleaning service to come in and clean the property up. Now, obviously, this made sense. I mean, I remember doing it on a deal where I was a six-figure wholesale deal, and I had about 6 hours, and I rented a U-Haul truck, and I got picked up 8 guys at Home Depot who spoke very little English, and I had them come and just move a ton of shit out. It was worth it, right? A six-figure deal. I'm gonna, spending 2 grand or less, less than 2 grand to do it is a no-brainer. So, but assuming you're smart and you run your business correctly, and again, it's not really, I shouldn't say that. Assuming the circumstances allow for it, because sometimes sellers or seller's attorney just won't take a tiny EMD. And if you have a great deal where you think you make a lot of money, you may put more money down. But assuming you can get away with less, so a $5,000 or $10,000 EMD deposit to the seller, and then bigger, a $20,000, $30,000 deposit from your buyer, you have room there. So what could be the worst? If you did that right, think about this. The buyer says, I can't close. You say, okay, I want, you gave me $30,000, give me $15,000, and I'll release the other 15. Buyer probably says, okay, give him back his 15. Go to the seller and say, I'm sorry, keep my $10,000 deposit. And then you made $5,000 anyway, which is what people make in a wholesale deal in other places. But again, circumstances are never as simple and cut and dried as I just said. But the truth is, you are in the middle on a wholesale deal. And sometimes being in the middle is not comfortable when you have a buyer who is, and sometimes it's not because you have a buyer who's a jerk or a buyer who's a liar or a buyer who is an ignorant person. It's like you have a buyer who's waiting for something, right? And they're not always going to tell you the truth. Like they're waiting for something else to close because they want to use the funds, or they're waiting for their hard money lender to give them the clear to close. Sometimes it's just the typical bullshit, and sometimes they're not going to be honest with you, right? And it's usually not a big deal if you have to push off a closing a few days. Sometimes it is a big deal. Sometimes you have a seller who says, like, I'm moving to South Carolina. I have my tickets. I'm ready to go. I need the money. And I'm not leaving until the deal closes, right? Now, the truth is that's 1980s thinking, because they can easily give a power of attorney to their attorney to represent them, or they can give a resolution if it's under an LLC, which most houses aren't. There are ways to go around it where they don't have to be there, but sometimes that concept doesn't enter their head. So, I mean, I've suggested it. I've told the people, sometimes they go for it, sometimes they don't. I'm like, I don't want to hold you up. Speak to your attorney. And sometimes you get jerk sellers attorneys who are like, I'm not signing for this guy. So there are a lot of things involved. Is there a way out of the contract? So again, if there is a real issue with title, you can get out of the contract, right? I had a $100,000 deposit on a deal, and it was an as-is contract, but it specifically listed the things that I was not going to hold up the contract for, and one of them was utility easements, and it had a scenic easement, and I sued for the $100,000 back, and I got it. I got lucky. I have a very good litigation attorney if you need one. So if title is clean and they have marketable title and there's nothing that you can hang your hat on, you really have no way out of the contract if a buyer bails on you. The way to prevent you from losing money in that situation, as I said, is to take more money from the buyer as an EMD, as an earnest money deposit, than you've given. Then there's room to negotiate. Then there's room so you don't have to lose. Then you can walk away from the seller and say, I feel terrible. I can't close. I'd probably make up a story as to why. I'm not going to say because my buyer couldn't close. Now, again, these things don't happen to me because I'll close. I'm pretty confident on the deal. Now, sometime, I can't say that this will never happen. Sometimes things come to light and you realize this is a bigger problem than I thought. Maybe the buyer found something that you didn't see. It could happen. It's never happened to me, but it can happen, right? Buyer finds some kind of real big problem that you didn't know about, then you may want to walk away. But that's the cost of doing business, right? That's going to happen. If you're doing a lot of deals, you're going to get fucked on some deals. It's just the way it is. I've lost money on deals. I remember every one that I lost money on. They suck, but it's part of business. If you talk to people who say, I never lost money, I got to tell you, I don't think they're doing a lot of business, right? There's going to be deals that come, but if you always should have enough deals in your pipeline that if you lose money on a deal, it's not the end of the world. So I hope this was helpful. This question comes up a lot. I'm probably going to answer it a lot more times in the coming years. I'm fine with answering it. So I hope this is helpful. If you're interested in all the ways I can help you, go to howtoflipnewyork.com or learntoflipandwholesale.com. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're watching on any media channel, please click the thumbs up. The likes really help the algorithm. A lot more people have been seeing my videos because a lot more people have been liking them, so keep liking them. Thank you, Naman, for your incredibly uplifting thought. And um, what else? Oh, I post 5 times a week. I really like your questions so that I can answer them. You can ask a question about anything. It does not have to be about the video you're watching. If it's something simple, I'll just reply with an answer. If it's something that I've covered recently, I'll send you a link to a video on it. And if it's something that I've never covered or I haven't covered in a long time, I'll do a brand new video on it. So thank you all for watching. I really, really, really appreciate everyone who watches, everyone who likes. Thank you very, very much.